16 million bucks and nearly no profit to show for it. We're going to be looking at a business today that's in that situation. And I'm going to explain how I would look at this as a CPA who's looked at over 1,000 financial statements myself. Let's get into it. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the situation that this person posted on Reddit. It says 29-year-old COO of a $16 million family business. Profitable on paper, but cash flow negative, and now behind on rent. What would you do? So it says, I'm a 29-year-old COO for our family business. We're in the logistics side of wines and spirits transportation. So for those who are not aware, logistics businesses are very thin on the margin side. Typically, you'll see these businesses under 10% net margin, but they're going to get into a little bit later what their actual margins are. He says it's his dad's business. And over time, he ended up taking over the operations side of the business. He said the operations are moving in the right direction, but we're really struggling financially. He said we have 65 employees. My dad has always been a fly by the seat of your pants operator, never really strong on the financial systems or use data to drive decisions. I think some people might find that surprising, but there are a lot of business owners that are growing incredibly large businesses without really honing in on this stuff. And I don't think the takeaway is that this stuff is not important. I think the takeaway really is that there's so much further opportunity for people who are taking advantage of this stuff. So he says, COVID hit, everything changed, demand spikes, and they end up renting a building that's double the size. So they go from 29K to 100K a month in rent, which is 3 to 4 times increase in rent. So they bring us up to speed here and say, today we're doing 60 million in revenue, but only about 200K in net profit, which is 1 to 1.5% margin. So, like we talked about earlier, this is a really margin thin business, but I've seen businesses like this in the 7 to 10% range. And to give you a ballpark of what that means on the net profit side, a business of this revenue level would be generating about $1.1 million on 7% net margins. So they give us a quick snapshot here, 16 million annual revenue, which is 1.3 per month. And then they give some per month totals here. So 400K per month payroll, which is about a third of that revenue total. Rent is at 100K per month. They're currently 300K behind on rent. And then it looks like accounts receivable, most customers pay within 30 days with some stretch to 60. AP, some vendors we keep current, others we've stretched to 60 to 90 days. I'm going to just point out a piece of information on cash flow here. When you have large volumes of AP and AR, you could end up with cash flow problems if your AR terms are not as good as your AP terms. For example, if your accounts receivable terms say that customers must pay you within 30 days, but your accounts payable terms say that you must pay bills within 15 days, you can imagine how you might be strained for cash if you have to pay your vendors quicker than you are able to collect on invoices. So that's the first level of this, but that's just the terms. So if you also think about your actual payments and your actual deposits, and you look at your days sales outstanding, which is basically going to show you how quickly you're collecting on your receivables. This might help paint a better picture of what's going on with your cash flow as it relates to your accounts receivable and accounts payable. So essentially what you want to do from an accounts payable and accounts receivable perspective is, in an ideal world, you'd rather have your invoices that go out to customers be paid quicker than you are paying your vendors. This ensures that you can collect the cash that you need to pay your bills before they become due. And just one final note on the terms, your payment terms, while they can dictate how quickly you get paid, do not actually completely dictate how you get paid, because you might have net 30 terms with a customer, but what exactly is stopping them from paying in 60 days or 90 days? So that's something you want to consider, is what is keeping people accountable for paying you on time? Do you have their payment information where you could pull payments directly from their account if they're not paying? Do you have any late fees in place? Things like that will help your collection process. They say we're generally profitable on paper, but consistently cash flow negative due to the timing and thin margins. And this is something I hear from a lot of business owners, is that they feel like they're making money, but when they check their bank account, they're not seeing the profits that they thought they were making. They said the cash flow crunch has been going on for 1.5 years now. Dad has taken some loans and exhausted a $750,000 line of credit, delayed some vendor payments just to make payroll. They said they're doing a financial package with TD to consolidate debt. This will improve cash flow by about 60K by reducing current debt payments which helps in the short term. Definitely a good call. I have these conversations with business owners all the time. And when debt is the constraint on your cash flow, one of the simplest things you can do is analyze your debt and look at the interest rates on everything you're paying. In most cases, what this means is your credit cards and personal loans are going to be the highest interest rate payments that you have. What you want to do in situations like this, where you know you're not going to be able to easily get rid of that debt in the short term, is to look into other credit options. For example, a line of credit typically offers a much lower interest rate than a credit card would. That being said, you might consider opening a line of credit to roll your credit card debt into. That way your monthly interest obligations are reduced. This is not always gonna be the make or break, but when it comes to interest, something that you pay but does not actually move your business forward, this is a really good first step to cut down on some of those costs. Okay, so they mentioned some things that they've tried to control on their end. So cutting unprofitable work and lanes, reducing headcount where needed, looking at pricing and rate increases, trying to improve efficiency across the board. And they want to know, what would you prioritize first, cash flow, cost cutting, or margin improvement? Is this realistically fixable without a major capital injection or asset sale? Okay, so super tough situation. I'm going to try to focus on the financial aspect and not as much the other dynamic at play, which is the fact that this person is running the operations for their father's business. So the first note that I would make is, while your dad does not want to go backwards, and I can totally understand that, you first want to make sure you look at what happened and then try to forecast the future to see where things are headed. So from a backward looking perspective, first and foremost is you need to make sure you have really solid, clean books and accurate financial information that you can rely on. Because if this information is not good, you will not be able to use the information to make the decisions that are needed in this situation. But once the books are solid, the first thing that I would do is look at your gross margins. So your gross margins are basically going to be your revenue less your cost of goods sold as a percentage. And this is going to be any supplies, materials, or labor that goes directly into generating the revenue that you generate. I think you make a good point here on cutting unprofitable lines of business. You definitely want to look at your margins by line of business, because there could be certain situations where you can cut out an unprofitable line of business that can actually increase your net profit just by removing that service line. So obviously, when you're looking at your gross margin, you're going to have two factors at play, which is your revenue and your cost of goods sold. But within that, you're going to have multiple layers of information and metrics you're going to want to look at and track. So as far as revenue goes, like we discussed earlier, you could be invoicing your clients and generating revenue on paper. But if your AR collection process is broken, it's going to be hard to generate the cash flow that you need to get back to where you want to be. Another major driver to look at is your pricing. If you are competing to be the lowest cost provider in the market, I would expect to have very low margins. Not to say that you can't run a business this way, but you might want to consider your pricing as it relates to your service offering and what the general market is charging. I think pricing should be such a sole focus, because all else equal, $1 increase in your price is $1 on your net profit. And that is super powerful to be able to add revenue without adding costs. Just to illustrate how powerful pricing is, for a business that is generating a 1% net profit margin, if you were to increase your prices 1%, all else equal, your net profit would jump from 1 to 2%, which is a doubling of your net profit. So for example, if you typically charge $1,000 and instead you charge $1,010, in this specific situation, you would double your net profit, all else equal. So that's super powerful. I think that should be a primary area of focus. And then some other items to consider are your lead generation and your conversion to customers. Given what was shown here, I don't know that the revenue generation is necessarily a problem. It seems to be more of a margin problem, which is either a cost problem or a pricing problem or some combination of the both. So once you've tackled your margins, the next area of focus is going to be on your operating expenses. And if your payroll is not already included in your cost of sales, this is probably going to be the first area that you want to look at, because it's typically going to be your largest expense. This is probably going to take a little bit of a deep dive on your end, but place I would look to make cuts is for unprofitable lines of work. You might also want to establish if you have any redundancies between your service lines that can be consolidated into a smaller number of roles. The person who posted this kind of mentioned this already, but the biggest problem is the rent, because they basically took on this giant contract and essentially it seems like the work has kind of finished and the revenue has not necessarily been replaced. And so they're in this situation where the rent is ballooning their costs and they don't have the revenue to justify it. As far as your options on rent, I have seen business owners who are renting large warehouses that were able to sublease their space to other business owners. So if you're not looking for a way out of your current lease, that's the first avenue I would explore to see if that's even a possibility, because being able to offset your rent a little bit here is going to really relieve some pressure when it comes to your margins. So for example, if you're able to essentially sublease 20% of the space, and let's say you get 20% of your rent back for that, that would be $20K a month or $240 per year, which would over double your net profit in this situation. If you have looked into that and exhausted that as an option, I would consider consulting your lawyer about what your options are as far as maybe getting out of your lease or negotiating with your current landlord. The fact of the matter is, as hard as these spaces are to lease, your landlord probably does not want to sit on a bunch of unpaid rent either. So just to summarize, where I would focus first is on your margins. The reason I always say this is that if your margins are not good, you can get to any revenue level and the business won't generate profit. So for example, if you generate $100 million a year, but your cost of goods sold are $100 million, that's a 0% gross margin. So the business is not going to do any better if you add another $100 million to the revenue total. That has to be solved for first, because the rest trickles down from there. Just think about your cost of goods sold more as a variable number. So as your revenue increases, your cost of goods sold should increase with it at a certain rate. While you're tackling this, I would take a look at your operating expenses. Look in those larger buckets that we mentioned and then go to the smaller ones. You might find that you're paying an obscene amount of money in insurance every year, or maybe you have to switch your payment processor to save a bunch of money on payment processing fees. These are some other tweaks that are not going to cause your business to run very differently in some cases, but may help you to cut costs where you need them. If you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments if there's any other topics that you'd like to see covered. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.